And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for this morning, Ms. Busisiwe Mavuso. Busisiwe Mavuso is a certified chartered accountant with extensive academic credentials, including 2 master's degrees, applied business leadership and management from Spain's UCAM and business leadership from UNISA. She holds additional qualifications from Gibbs and a Bachelor of Accounting Science from UNISA, whilst currently pursuing a PhD. As CEO of Business Leadership South Africa, Busi serves as a non-executive director at Alan Gray Orbis Foundation, Business Unity South Africa, Business Against Crime South Africa, and Resultant Finance. She contributes to national development through roles on the Human Resources Development Council and the Council of Social Justice Champions, and is an associate of the Alan Gray Center at UCT. I'd like to welcome Ms. Busisiwe Mavuso on stage to deliver our keynote address. Can we please give her a round of applause?
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and thank you very much, Chris, for the invitation for me to come and have this conversation with you today. Thank you very much, Chairman of the Board. Thank you to the Deputy Chair. Thanks for allowing me in to your space and allow me to contribute my thoughts in terms of some of the conversations that you are going to be having for the next 2 days. So the timing of your conference is quite interesting. The timing of your conference is absolutely apt in terms of where we find ourselves as a country at the moment. When just 2 weeks ago, our country has been shaken by the explosive allegations that have been made against our Minister of Police. He has been placed on leave of absence on Sunday. We all listened to the president do that. And 2 days later, on Tuesday, the Deputy National Commissioner was also placed on a similar leave of absence. And yes, these remain just allegations. But you know, these are not allegations you want to have against those that are charged to be the custodians of the rule of law. If you have such responsibility on you, and of course we are not saying anything yet, we don't know, but we also know that there is no smoke without fire. These are not allegations as a country that you actually want to have for those who are supposed to be protecting the public. Because once you have such allegations, it strikes right at the heart of our criminal justice system. It undermines and compromises everything that we are trying to correct and build as a country. Because if supposedly the law enforcement is compromised, who will protect the citizens? If supposedly the law enforcement is compromised, who safeguards the public when the integrity of the police is in question? It is for this reason that I've chosen to title my address and give it the topic that says, systems fail when leadership and governance fails. systems fail when leadership and governance fail. Because when things like this happen, you probably maybe go back and say, but what went wrong? What happened? Where did we miss it as a country? When systems that are supposed to keep the country, the institutions running, when the engine room is not working as it should, when the systems are failing, you look at leadership and you look at governance and you say, by the way, how are we doing in as far as that is concerned? Systems fail. When systems fail, you just need to look to leadership to say, where is the leadership? Are we doing everything we're supposed to do to ensure that we protect and safeguard our systems? Systems fail when leadership and governance fails. You know, I remember having a conversation with someone about where the country is at the moment and how governance in so many areas of this country is compromised. And he synthesized it quite profoundly for me. He said, you know, it's amazing how leadership and governance seem like such over-exaggerated concepts until they are no longer there. Now, that is good English. I thought, okay, that is Model C English, English that I definitely don't have. He said, it's amazing how leadership and governance seem like such over-exaggerated concepts until they are no longer there. Because while they are there, we probably maybe think that everything is on autopilot. You know what, just think of a simple example, ESCOM. A few years ago, you walk into your house, you switch on the lights come on. You don't even think about it. It's automatic. You expect it. It's like getting into your car and starting the engine. You expect the engine to run unless there is something faulty with it. The engine just, you don't even think about it. It just works. It's amazing how leadership and governance seem like such over-exaggerated concepts until they are no longer there. But when you look at it and you say, but what contributes to a system working? What is it that needs to be in place for a system to work? And yes, a system relies on many inputs and components, but let's agree that some of those inputs and components are way more important than others. Leadership and governance carry the greatest weight in determining our collective trajectory. Leadership and governance carry the greatest weight in keeping everything running smoothly. Leadership and governance are the foundation upon which everything is built upon. If we're talking about this building and we say, where is leadership and for this building to function, light, ceiling, and whatever the case is, warmth, and for it to function as it should, the leadership and governance should be the foundation. If this foundation is shaky, we don't even have this building to start with. So leadership and governance become the foundation that everything else is built upon. So if we ask ourselves of the question of how did we get here as a country? How did we get ourselves into this mess? What happened? You will see that things started falling apart when we messed with that which we were never supposed to mess with in the first place. Things started falling apart. We dropped to these depths. We dropped the bar this low. We plummeted to these low levels when we decided and we took a very deliberate and intentional and premeditated decision as a country to destabilize leadership and governance in this country. That is when the trajectory of South Africa, and that has obviously impacted the economy and everything else because it's got ripple effects. But think about it, 1994, when we took over this country, by the way, we were a junk status country in 1994. 1996, we were investment grade. And the trajectory was going in that direction. And when we touched what we were never supposed to mess with as a country in the first place in 2009, you saw the curve dipping. That is what has contributed to this mess, and that is why we're here, and we're still trying to fix those problems and those mistakes that we did at that time. And I'm not saying the Mandela era and the Mbeki era were perfect, but those eras demonstrated a keen understanding of the critical components that underpin a functioning society. Because you see, while leadership and governance are still there, systems hum along. When leadership and governance are there, institutions thrive. When leadership and governance are there, countries prosper. As I said earlier on, when leadership and governance are there, it seems as if the country is on autopilot, but it is not. The country is functioning because the essential elements that are supposed to be there are there. But when you remove these essential elements, the facade of stability comes crumbling down. When you remove those elements, you realize how quickly everything disintegrates. When you remove those elements, you realize just how quickly this entire pyramid comes falling down into a pile of rubbish. Countries fall apart when governance fails at government level. Countries fall apart. It doesn't matter what we do as the private sector. It doesn't matter what we do as civil society. As soon as you mess with governance at government level, countries fall apart. And that is the mistake that we did as a country. I'm currently reading a very interesting book titled Why Nations Fail. It is written by Darren Acemoglu and James Robinson. It talks about how achieving prosperity as a country depends on solving basic political problems. And the book says, Africa is failing not because of the ignorance hypothesis, which means that we are not failing because we don't know what to do. You know, sometimes you make mistake, you take a wrong turn, and you realize, I was not supposed to have taken that turn, and that is ignorance. You're doing the wrong thing, not intentionally, it's not premeditated. You're doing the wrong thing because you don't know, and somehow you hit a stumbling block. The book says Africa is failing not because of the ignorance hypothesis. We're not failing because we don't know what to do. Africa is failing because of the endless stream of economically irrational decisions and developments that we've been making as a continent. We are failing because our leaders intentionally choose bad policies, which therefore result in bad economics. We are failing because our leaders choose bad politics and they think they can get away with it. They do so because they see it as a way of keeping themselves in power. They do it because they think it's a way of buying political support. They do it because they think they can, and they do it because they think they can get away with it. You know, my biggest disappointment when it comes to South Africa is that out of the 54 African countries in the continent, we attained our democracy last. Surely the advantage of coming last is that you realize the mistakes of those that have come before you. But it seems as if we are doing exactly what the other 54 or 53 countries have actually done. And we are doing it at such a pace that we are even trying to overtake them because we actually got our democracy last and we actually did this last. Systems fail when leadership and governance fails. You see, the problem we have as a country is that this fish called South Africa is rotten from the head. Doesn't matter what the body does. If the head is rotten, it's going to be difficult to try and salvage this thing. It becomes difficult to effectively deal with crime when you have thieves masquerading as government ministers and government officials. It becomes difficult to try and deal with crime and corruption when you have political figures implicated in the state capture project and they continue to walk around with impunity. South Africa's problem when it comes to corruption is a culture problem. It's a culture that has been cultivated and set from the top. The political culture in South Africa is that being accused of crime is not embarrassing. I can be accused of crime and I can walk out here, with my head held up high and nothing will happen to me. And if that is the culture at the top, what makes us think that the lawlessness that we're experiencing as a country will be able to deal with it? Because the message that we are sending, when you've got thieves masquerading as government officials and there is no action taken against them, they still continue to be members of parliament, what makes you think that people are going to do any differently? Because people don't do what you say, they do what you do. So your actions are speaking volumes and they're actually speaking loud. And the message that we're sending from a political perspective, we are saying crime pays. We are saying you can commit crime and nothing will happen to you. We are saying you can commit crime and you can still hold a high political office. You can commit crime and better yet, you can be a president of the country. That is the message that we actually send. You see, if the president was intentional about taking a no-nonsense approach against crime, corruption, and if he was intentional on being stern on governance, this governance crisis that has been exemplified by the Senzo Mchunu affair demands stern action. Proper suspension, maybe he can't fire him yet, but proper suspension pending investigation as a sanction, given the serious allegations of lying to Parliament and interfering in police investigations, would have been more appropriate. Not leave of absence. I don't even know what the hell that means. What leave of absence means? You either suspend a person or you don't. That is what we do in corporate South Africa. Especially when just 2 weeks ago, the president set a very high bar for his cabinet when he dismissed the deputy president for taking an overseas trip without final approval. So when he took that action, he was actually saying, hey, I'm not playing. I'm expecting you, this is how I'm going to deal with you now. I'm not laughing with you anymore. This is how I'm going to deal with you at this. He set a very high bar. And if we can fire officials for procedural violations, how can we treat potential obstruction of justice to investigations with less severity? It doesn't make sense. Just before the elections, Mistra is a think tank that is run by Joel Neshisenze. Mistra apparently conducted a survey in South Africa last year sometime. And I don't know whether the survey was before the election survey or it was a 30 years into democracy survey. But they conducted a survey going around interviewing ordinary South Africans. They just wanted to know from ordinary South Africans. I don't know how many people they interviewed. They just wanted to know, give us a one-word descriptor of how you feel as a South African right now. Just one word. Not long stories, one word. And the word that many South Africans used was disappointed in terms of where they find themselves, at that time, in terms of where their headspace is. South Africans were saying, we are disappointed. And obviously, they didn't unpack it in terms of disappointed in where the country is, disappointed in the failed promise of our democracy, disappointed in we don't know, and I'm sure it's all of the above. The one-word descriptor that South Africans gave was disappointed. People had lost faith in politics because of corruption. The two most important currencies that have kept social stability in this country are hope and trust. And those currencies are no longer there. Because you see, as much as a lot of people in our country are struggling, as much as we're sitting with 60% 60% poverty levels, 43% unemployment in terms of the expanded definition, where you have more people that are unemployed than those that are employed in all the provinces except Gauteng and the Western Cape. As much as you are the most unequal society in the world, as much as you continue to have 65% unemployment, youth unemployment, 2 out of 3 young people that are unemployed, as much as you have all those problems, you continue to have a functioning country and you continue to have social stability because people have hope and trust that, tomorrow is going to be better than today. And once people lose that, anarchy is going to ensue. And we don't want to push our people there. So we cannot continue doing what we are doing as leaders. People continue to vote and they show up and they, we hope, whatever. There's going to be elections next year, municipal elections. They are going to be campaigning, saying, hey, we're going to build you houses, water, and whatever. And people continue to hold on to that hope. But for how long? And once they lose that hope, these 2 currencies of hope and trust are going to be lost. And once those are lost, you no longer have social stability in the country. And if we want to know what social instability looks like, let's just cast our minds back to July 2021. The anarchy that happened in this country just for 4 days, it is the same anarchy, by the way, that is being threatened by people in KZN who are saying hands off from Mkhwanazi. Those 4 days, I think as a country, I don't even know the quantification of it, but we lost billions of rands. That is what social instability looks like. A lot of us watched this from our TV screens, and we said, how did South Africa get here? We last saw this in the 80s, with the uprisings and whatever. How are we here as a country? How have we pushed our people to this level? And interestingly enough, in reflecting on that, someone said, what happened with that July anarchy? It doesn't matter what the genesis of it was. This person was saying what we experienced as a country was not a rule of law problem. We experienced a poverty explosion problem. That is what happens in those 4 days of July 2020. It was a poverty explosion problem. Because you've got to think about it. The people who were coming out of their houses with gowns, with old people, old people our ages here, going into these shopping centers with a bag of milli, you and I, who still have the means to can buy our groceries every month and feed our kids and take our kids to school. And so we are not the ones who are actually rushing out, to say that, to go and grab a bag of, whatever the anarchy that ensued. So I'm sure it would have taken, when someone had that, hey, Pick n Pay, you can grab stuff and whatever is happening, I'm sure it was because they left their homes because there was no milli meal, there was no fish oil, and they thought that, if I can just secure 2 bags, I know that I'm set for the next 2. What we experienced at that time was not so much a rule of law problem, but a poverty explosion problem. So if we lose the hope and trust, social instability ensues. And how it presents itself is precisely what we experienced during those 4 days in July 2021. The same book that I'm talking about, titled Why Nations Fail, starts by outlining the Arab Spring example. They say, if you look at what the root of discontent was in Tunisia in 2010, December, when the Arab Spring happened, which led to the ousting of their President Zine El Abidine on the 14th of January 2011, and a similar uprising ensued in Egypt which led to the ousting of that president as well, President Hosni Mubarak. They say the roots of the people of Tunisia's discontent lie in their poverty. What made that country go up in flames, the roots of their discontent lie in their poverty. They are saying ordinary Egyptians were clear that we are suffering from corruption. They were clear that we are suffering from oppression and bad education. They were clear that we are living in a corrupt system which has to change. And their demands were focused on political change. They were very clear that the things that held them back were an ineffective and corrupt state and society, and they realized that the roots of their problems were political. Countries fall apart when governance fails at government level. You know, I'm normally criticized for being too hard on government, but government matters. I said earlier on, we've got 4 social partners in this country. You've got government, you've got business, you've got civil society, you've got the unions. It doesn't matter what the other 3 social partners do. If government is not showing up in a manner that they have to, countries fall apart. Government matters. Government matters because when you look at what separates good, prosperous states from bad, failing states, it is governments. It is not ethnicity. It is not strongman leadership. It is not natural endowments. It is not geography. It is governments. Governments are what separates good, prosperous states from bad, failing states. So governments matter. And when things are messed up there, when leadership and governance fails at that level, then the systems of the country fail. Systems fail when leadership and governance fails. People had so much hope when we ushered in this new democracy. They had so much hope, and a lot of them, I normally listen and I say, it is an indictment on those of us who call ourselves leaders for people to say, maybe, just maybe, it was better pre-1994. Because we had decent houses, we had jobs. Our kids were not loitering the streets with degrees. We had power. We had water. We didn't have potholes. And that list goes on. It is an indictment on us for people to say that system of oppression and dispossession and disenfranchisement was better than where we find ourselves at the moment. It is like a red card on you as a leader to say you have failed, you are not doing what you are supposed to do. Because you see, revolutions that simply take over the reins from those they disposed and they recreate a similar system, which the people find themselves in a similar system of pre-94, where there is still a different kind of oppression, where there is still a different kind of dispossession. And if you have a revolution that brings back such systems, then that revolution is useless. So we cannot, therefore, fall into that category. And when that revolution fails, people are even much more angrier to say, but it cannot be. It can't be you who now does this same thing that we experienced pre-1994. You know, for those of us who call themselves leaders, and especially for those of us who happen to be Black African, when you ascend into these positions of power, so many people, because the majority of the citizens of this country at the end of the day are Black. Majority of the citizens of this country look like me. They are Black, African, and they are women. So when people like me ascend into power, it gives so many people hope to say maybe, just maybe, when someone like her ascends into a leadership positions, maybe things for us will change. Where I come from, in Soweto, White City, Jabavu, people celebrate to say, no, man, I think we've got the right people in power now. They understand our struggle. They understand, what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. So if she ascends to power, then things should be better. So how is it then possible that these very same people that were celebrated now are the very ones who are now exerting the same oppression, dispossession, and people are worse off than what they were in 1994. It creates serious disillusionment on the citizens. It cannot be right. One of my favorite Pan-African leaders is a Kenyan lawyer and activist called Professor Patrice Lumumba. He is very brutal in his, if you think I'm brutal in my assessment of government, listen to Professor Patrice Lumumba. He's very brutal in terms of his assessment of where Africa is and why Africa is here. I was listening to his clip some time ago. He was talking at a conference in Nigeria, in Lagos. And he was given this topic of Africa, the rising continent. And in his address, he starts to talk about the importance of political leadership. And he goes on to lambast the poor leadership in Africa, saying that Africa is what it is because our leaders are not what they ought to be. He says, when you elect a clown in the hopes that he's going to be a king, what he does is that he converts the entire kingdom into a circus. He says, that is part of the African problem. He says, it all starts with political hygiene. He says most of Africa is suffering because we don't have democracies. We've got kakistocracies. I learned that word for the first time, but they would say, hey, this can't be English. Kakistocracies. No. He says Africa is suffering because we don't have democracies. We've got kakistocracies. A kakistocracy is a country or a system or a state governed by its least competent. A kakistocracy is a state that is governed by its worst. A kakistocracy is a state that is governed by its least suitable. He says, Africa will rise when we elect our best men and women to lead us. He says, when you allow hyenas to take care of goats, why are you then surprised when the goats are eaten? Because you know very well that it is in the nature of the hyena to eat goats. And when it eats the goat, you're saying, Mara, why is it eating the goat? What did you expect? It is living up to its own nature. It is doing what it naturally comes to it. He says, Singapore did it. And they effected the change when they elected Lee Kuan Yew. Why can't Africa do it? He says Malaysia did it when they elected Mahathir Mohamad. Why can't Africa do it? Why are we failing to elect men and women who can actually lead us? He says, but the problem when it comes to these things and when it continues to happen, the problem is no longer in the leadership. The problem is in the followership. Because you need to look at the followers to say, but why do you continue to put a system that continues to oppress you? He says, followers must jack up. He says, the problem with Africa is that Africa is attracted to thieves. That is why Africa is here. Africa is attracted to men and women who cannot serve her. And when they are not served, they complain. Close quote. South Africa is the engine room of the African continent. South Africa matters in a lot of different respects. We have the biggest economy in the continent. We're the most resilient. We're the most diversified. We're the most technologically advanced. We have better integration into the global market as South Africa. We have the most deep and liquid markets. We've got the best infrastructure, even with all our problems. So South Africa cannot fail. South Africa cannot be another failed African state because of leadership and governance failures. We have to do everything in our power to root out these elements. It should keep us awake at night that we are currently witnessing a dramatic expansion and legitimization of organized crime, which is rapidly rising, and it has dire implications for our economy and the country's stability. It should be unacceptable that South Africa is recording an alarming rise in kidnappings, in extortions, in organized robbery, in organized violence, in corruption, in theft of critical infrastructure, and. We cannot continue to occupy the top spot when they are talking about the most dangerous countries in the world. I was looking at the Numbeo's index. They are saying South Africa is the third most dangerous country in the world. It cannot be. I looked at that Oval meeting between our President Cyril Ramaphosa and Donald Trump, and I looked at how we're at pains as South Africans to explain just how rife crime and violence is in this country. You look at it and you say, really? Is that what we should be known for? You know, is that what you... And I remember shortly after that, we actually saw from the tourism industry quite a few cancellations from tourists in Europe who are actually saying, you know, if this is the extent of the crime, and if the senior leaders in South Africa themselves are talking about just how bad things are, because every one of those people who spoke were at pains to explain just how bad this country is from a crime, violence, and corruption perspective. So a lot of people were actually canceling their trips, and they were saying, we don't know if this is the country we should actually be visiting. As a South African, I couldn't have been more happier with the election outcome of the 29th of May, 2024. Because the way we voted as South Africans, we attempted to address the serious political hygiene problem that we're experiencing as a country. You know, I've been listening to Thabo Mbeki a lot at the moment because he's been brought back in by the ANC to try and help with the ANC revival and whatever the case is. He says, our glorious movement has been overtaken by thieves. He says, the movement that we started so many years ago no longer exists. You just have opportunists who have overtaken the movement. I could not have been more happier with the outcome election of the 29th of May 2024 as a country, because we tried in our own way as South Africans to say enough and no more. We tried to address the political hygiene problem. And I'm very encouraged because in the work that I do, I work quite closely with government. I'm very encouraged. You know, we have a lot of problems. And yes, we are doing our best to try and pull ourselves with our bootstrings. Yes, we've got the geopolitical tensions and the tariff implications that are actually, you know, giving us a difficult time as a country. But I'm very encouraged about some of the work that I'm seeing from these new government ministers. You know, we've been subjected to so much incompetence. We've been subjected to so much mediocrity for so long as a country that it is so encouraging to look at ministers take their jobs seriously and just do their jobs. It is like you are inspired just watching a fish swim. You're like, wow, it swims. Of course it swims. That is what the damn thing is supposed to do. But this fish has not been swimming. It has been so useless for so long. So just watching this new energy that is being brought in by these new ministers is just so encouraging. You know, what we're seeing in working with a lot of these government ministers on a very close basis is actually very encouraging. Their commitment to the structural reform agenda is refreshing. I listen to many of them articulate what success looks like for their departments, and I'm in awe. Some of them might not have achieved much, but when you look at their visions, when you look at their plans, when you look at what their true north looks like, when you look at them talk about, in 5 years, this is what I want to achieve, you are actually very encouraged. I'm encouraged about how we have dealt with the visa backlogs in this country. I'm encouraged about how Transnet is beginning to invite private operators to run ports and rails. I'm encouraged about how our government IT procurement systems have been revised. Because government has got a lot of challenges, but it has not been helped by the fact that it has got this institution called CETA, which just makes it impossible. The dysfunction in CETA is just, you just can't win. The reason why SARS, from an IT perspective, can do what it needs to do, it's because back then it asked from a reprieve from National Treasury to say, we can't use CETA. You have to allow us to go outside to procure our IT systems from an outside company. And the reason why they are winning, the reason why they are on top, in terms of some of the collection tax revenue service collection agencies in the world, is precisely because their IT systems are working as they should. Their systems are working as they should. So when we introduced the legislation which said that government departments no longer have to be subjected to CETA's dysfunction, they can now contract the best-in-class suppliers for the work that they need to do. I looked at that and I said, but that is precisely what we needed to have done a long time ago. I'm encouraged by the fact that, yes, we have water problems, but water is receiving attention in this country. I'm encouraged by the fact that National Treasury has amended Regulation 16 of the PFMA, which means that PPPs as an investment lever can now be utilized. Because when you look at, we often talk about needing foreign direct investment in this country. And when you look at how you can actually get investment in this country, there is only 4 ways. You can do it through private investment, and that is very minimal at the moment because foreign direct investors are looking at our country and they are saying it's just too difficult to do business here, so you don't have a lot of investment coming in. You can do it through the fiscus. We are broke as a country, by the way, so we can't do it through the fiscus. You can do it through PPPs, and PPPs have not been a lever that has been utilized for so long because just doing PPPs in this country has just been so difficult. So when National Treasury a few months ago amended the Regulation 16, and we've been making noise about it as business for so long, to say, make it easy to do public-private partnerships in this country because public-private partnerships work. And now you actually have that legislation that has actually been amended. So you have all of these changes that are really representing fundamental shifts in how government operates. And it's important because it directly addresses the challenge of state incapacity that we're actually facing in this country. State capacity that has crippled our economy, that has impacted service delivery, that has actually not made it possible for us to have a conducive environment for business to operate in this country. And I'm very encouraged about the posture that so many of these ministers are taking, which is trying to co-create solutions with business. Because where we need to go as this country, we need to have a capable state. You've got a business-government partnership at the moment, where as business we have intervened in terms of trying to help government sort out the issue of energy, transport, logistics, and crime and corruption. But we can only do so much as business. And we are intervening because you currently don't have a capable state. And systems fail when leadership and governance fails. And business has had to step in to try and assist in as far as those things are concerned. But what we are doing as business is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. An end in itself is when government becomes a capable state. It's when government does what it's supposed to do on its own, because we pay them taxes to do precisely that. So the conversations, as I draw to a close, the conversations that you're going to be having over the next 2 days are important. Your efforts as a sector, as an industry, as a profession, of trying to find a way of how do you apply some of these scientific principles and techniques to try and analyze evidence and help investigate crimes is important. Your quest to try and shape the fight against financial crime in this country by better leveraging technologies and other systems is important. And I hope that you have very good conversations for the next 2 days. As I close, I was very touched when the program director asked us to have a moment of silence for Mpho Mafole. I looked at this, I don't know him, I've never met him. I'm looking at this as an ordinary South African young boy who was at the AG 4 months ago, decides to, because so many of us look at what's happening in government and we say, no, it's not our problem, it's someone else's problem. I would not dare. He decided that, I was listening, actually, last night I watched an interview by his father, who was actually saying, he kept on complaining about how there isn't the culture there at City of Uguru, and said, no man, the way the people are working there, no man, Dad, but I'm going in there, I'm really going to try and make this work, people have to work together, and then the next thing, 4 months later, this child has been killed. Our government continues to talk about the professionalization of the public service. Professionalization of the public service means that you and I, who have got skills, who are currently sitting outside of government, have to actually put up our hands and say, let's go to government and try and fix things. But it becomes difficult when you try and do that, when just for doing your job, you lose your life. So it's like working for government in this country is a dangerous sport. When you stick your neck out and stand on the right side of the law and stand for truth, you actually get killed. So I know how your profession is under siege at the moment. The work that you do cannot be easy. So that's why I think with all sincerity, I'm actually saying I hope the deliberations that you're going to have for the next 2 days are deliberations that will actually give you interventions and plans. And I see the Deputy Chair is standing up. It means my time is up. Apologies, Deputy Chair. I'm definitely going off stage now. But the level of moral and ethical degeneration that we have sunk to as a country is unacceptable. So I really hope that for the next 2 days, you are going to try and solve for precisely that. Good luck, you need it, and I sincerely mean that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you very much, Busisiwe, for that absolutely amazing keynote address. I think it was incredibly thought-provoking. I must say that I'm very pleased to say that business leadership has its eye on me. I wasn't actually standing up, my leg got numb and I was trying to move. But thank you. As a gesture of our thanks, we'd like to provide you with something. This gift is a special-made gift by an impoverished community who we as the ICFP would like to support. And so I know you will appreciate this gift, but thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And and if you could please join us for some drinks in our comfort break to mingle with our guests. Thank you. All right, so we're about to go into a comfort break, but before we do that, there was in Busi's talk a lot of talk of hyenas and goats being eaten. I got a bit hungry. And I also thought about grievances. And I think many of you would have done an investigation, and a report is produced, and all of a sudden grievances start to come up by people that are accused in the reports. they lodge grievances against those who make the allegations, etc., or they make whistleblower reports. But speaking of grievances, I've got a grievance. For those of you that attended our conference last year, you will remember that on this stage, I was accused. I was accused of stealing chocolates. I have no idea why, but it was a malicious accusation. And I'd like to say that I was absolved from any wrongdoing. I was not the chocolate thief at the conference last year. I denied those allegations vehemently with the contempt they deserved. And I was freed. But the stigma of that allegation has stayed with me. And there's one individual in this audience, and I can't say who she is because of the Protection of Personal Information Act, which is providing her with protection, but I can see her now. I met her for coffee last year, and I've been called many things, but for the first time I was called the chocolate guy. Outraged, absolutely outraged. She's sitting on this side of the audience, about 6 rows down, by the aisle. That is my accuser. Okay, I'm making light of it. But ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Ms. Busisiwe Mavuso for an amazing keynote address. We're about to go into a 30-minute comfort break. There'll be some breakfast, coffees, and drinks for you to enjoy. Please network. Use the time to meet with Busisiwe. Ask her any questions that you'd like. And so yeah, enjoy the comfort break. If everybody could please be back promptly at 10:30 because we are streaming amongst the various regions. And logistically, I just need to make sure that we coordinate the time accordingly. Thank you.